The 14th interpreter pulled off his headset and walked away. In a conference room worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, 8 international delegations began closing their briefcases. The CEO felt the blood drain from her face. Months of preparation, collapsing in real time. And at the far end of the hallway, a black man in gray coveralls and yellow rubber gloves was quietly wiping the glass walls. A man no one in that building had ever bothered to learn the name of. When he stepped forward and spoke fluent Mandarin, the entire room went dead silent. Now, before I tell you how this man ended up in that room and what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me. This one is worth staying for. But that moment hadn't happened yet. Because 12 hours before the world's most expensive silence, Anthony Carter was doing what he did every night before the city woke up, moving through empty hallways with a mop, invisible to everyone, carrying something extraordinary that no one had ever thought to ask about. The building was empty at 4 a.m. the way only large buildings can be, not quiet exactly, but evacuated, stripped of the performance that filled it by day. The fluorescent lights hummed their single sustained note. The elevator doors opened and closed for no one. Anthony Carter moved through it all with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He had started the night at the subway maintenance depot 3 blocks east, mopping platforms, wiping handrails, collecting what the city left behind. Now he was here, finishing his second shift in the glass tower where Meridian Financial held 32 floors of prime real estate and paid him to keep it spotless before the people who mattered arrived. He didn't mind the hours. The hours were honest. What most people don't understand about working the night shift is what it teaches you about a place. When a building is full, you see its surface, the performance, the hierarchy, the careful social architecture of who walks where and who holds which door. When it empties, you see the structure underneath. Anthony knew this building the way a doctor reads an X-ray. Not the face of it. The bones. He finished the 28th floor just before 5, rode the elevator down, and let himself into the small break room the custodial staff shared with overnight security. He made coffee, real coffee, stovetop, the way his mother had taught him, and sat down with the book he'd left there 2 nights ago. Camus. In French. Not a translation. The original. He read the way some people breathe, without deciding to, without stopping to consider whether it was worth the effort. The French didn't feel foreign. It felt like a second texture, a different way of holding the same thought. Certain ideas only made complete sense to him in it. Certain feelings only had the right shape there. He finished his coffee. Closed the book. Rode back up to finish the last floors before the executives arrived. His apartment was 20 minutes away. Jade would be asleep at the kitchen table, her homework spread around her. He would cover her with the blanket from the couch. Make her breakfast. Get her to school. Sleep 4 hours. Come back and do it again. This was his life. He had built it carefully, deliberately, around her. It held. What he hadn't noticed, what a man can miss when survival becomes routine, was how much of himself he had quietly set aside in the building of it. Not lost. Set aside. The way you place a coat in the back of a closet when you no longer have anywhere to wear it. It was still there. He just hadn't opened that door in a very long time. Memory doesn't work in straight lines. It works in fragments, a smell, a sound, the quality of light through a specific window on an afternoon that meant something then and still does now, even though the afternoon is long gone. Columbia University. Fall semester. A letter with an official seal and the particular weight of paper that changes a life. A woman laughing in a library stairwell, not quietly, not the way you're supposed to laugh in libraries, but fully, completely, like laughter was the only honest response to something genuinely wonderful. That was Renee. That was how he had known, in the first 10 seconds of knowing her, that she was someone he could not afford to lose. A hospital corridor. The specific blue of institutional chairs. A doctor's voice using words that are technically English but belong to an entirely different language, the clinical language of managed expectations, designed to say the unbearable in tones that ask you not to fall apart in the hallway. A bill. Then another. Then a letter from the university: "We regret to inform you that your scholarship has been discontinued." Anthony had not failed. He had stopped. There is a difference, and it matters enormously, and the university's database had no field to capture it. What the records showed was a student who did not complete his degree. What the records could not show was a man working 3 jobs while his wife was dying, reading linguistics papers in waiting rooms because staying sharp was the only thing that felt like agency, keeping every textbook in a box in the closet because throwing them away would mean admitting something he was not yet ready to admit. He kept listening after Renee was gone, because you cannot turn off a genuine aptitude any more than you can turn off your hearing. On the subway at midnight, he caught fragments of Tagalog and filed them. In the restaurant where he bussed tables on Fridays, the Brazilian kitchen staff sharpened his Portuguese without knowing it. In the lobbies he cleaned, he read the documents people left behind. German legal journals from the recycling bin. Mandarin trade reports left stacked by the shredder. Arabic business correspondence that no one locked away because who would read it? 8 languages, maintained in secret, for no external purpose. No career attached. No credential. No audience. There is something worth understanding in that. Real aptitude doesn't primarily run on reward. It persists even when no one is watching, even when there is no prize at the end, even when there is no logical reason to continue. Anthony Carter kept 8 languages alive for 11 years inside a life that offered him no visible use for them, not because he expected it to matter, but because he could not make himself let go of the person he had been before the world drew its hard lines around him. The scholarship letter was still in the box. He had never thrown it away either. The conference room on the 31st floor had been transformed overnight, and Anthony noticed it the moment the elevator doors opened, the particular stillness of a space arranged with deliberate intention, the way a stage looks different when the set has been built but the actors haven't arrived yet. The standard table was gone. In its place, a vast U-shaped arrangement with 8 national flags standing in a precise line near the entrance. Briefing packets thick as novels at each station. Translation headsets along the back credenza. 8 placards. 8 delegations. 8 languages. Anthony read the flags without needing the labels. He recognized each one not as a symbol but as a door, and behind each door, a different way of understanding trust, time, and what a signed agreement actually means between people with different histories. He had spent years reading the financial documents and legal correspondence these countries produced. He understood not just their languages but their logics. He ran his hand along the edge of the polished conference table as he wiped it. He read the delegate names on the placards. He already knew exactly how to greet each one, not just linguistically, but culturally, which is an entirely different and far more consequential skill. He knew which delegations required formality as a precondition for trust. Which ones read directness as respect. Which ones would interpret small talk as wasted time and which ones would read its absence as coldness. This is what most language programs don't teach, and it is the most important thing. A language is not a code to be cracked. It is a culture to be understood. The words are the surface. Underneath them lives an entire system of values, histories, and unspoken agreements about how human beings should treat each other. You can memorize vocabulary without ever touching that layer. You can pass a proficiency exam without ever understanding what makes a phrase land with warmth rather than offense. Most professional translators operate at the surface. They are trained to. Precision is rewarded. Cultural weight is harder to measure and rarely tested. Anthony finished wiping the table. Straightened the last placard. Positioned the chairs at the angle the setup diagram specified. Then he picked up his mop, walked out, and stood in the hallway for just a moment before pushing his cart toward the elevator. In 2 days, that room would hold the most consequential negotiation in Meridian's history. People who represented nations would sit in those chairs and try to build something together across every difference that language and culture and history had placed between them. He would not be in the room. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped in. He had a subway platform to finish before 6. The negotiation began at 9 on a Tuesday morning and started fracturing before the first hour was done. The lead interpreter had called in sick at 7:15, stomach virus, couldn't stand without the room spinning. The first replacement handled the opening pleasantries and then met his limit in German. He translated a standard protective legal clause as an accusation of anticipated bad faith. The German delegation's lead counsel set down his pen. When a German lawyer sets down his pen mid-sentence, the room has stopped moving. The second replacement managed German but collapsed on Japanese. He addressed a senior member of the Tokyo delegation at the wrong honorific register, the equivalent, in the precise social architecture of formal Japanese, of calling a respected elder by their first name in front of their colleagues. The Tokyo team did not visibly react. Japanese business culture is too disciplined for visible reaction. They simply went cold, and in Japanese negotiation, cold is not a temperature. It is a position. The third interpreter made the error that nearly ended everything. An Arabic phrase, a conditional expression of openness, the Gulf business equivalent of "we would like to understand the specific terms more clearly before proceeding," came out in English as "we declined to cooperate at this time." The Saudi delegation leader pushed back from the table. His deputy reached for his phone. 4 more came and failed. Then 4 more after that. Each departure deposited a new layer of diplomatic damage in the room. By the time the 14th set his headset on the table and walked out, quietly, without theater, with the particular composure of a man who knows his limit, the room had moved from professional difficulty into genuine collapse. What those 14 interpreters shared was not a lack of training. Most were credentialed and experienced. What they lacked was the understanding that language is not a technical system, it is a human one. Every phrase carries not just meaning but history, the weight of what a people has survived and what they need to feel seen. Translate the words without translating that weight and you haven't actually translated anything. You've rearranged sounds. Anthony was in the hallway. He had heard every mistake through a door someone had left slightly open. His expression hadn't changed, it almost never did. But his hand on the mop handle had gone white, the only visible sign of a man listening to something he could fix and holding himself back from fixing it, feeling the cost of that restraint grow with every passing minute. He stood still in the hallway and ran the calculation that any reasonable person in his position would run. He was a contracted custodial worker with no clearance for that room, no credentials the building would recognize, and no authority the system acknowledged. If he walked through that door and it went wrong, if the room rejected him before he could demonstrate anything, he would be out by end of day. No severance. No reference. No explanation that would make sense to any future employer looking at a 4-year record followed by a termination for misconduct. He thought about Jade. The lease renewal was next month. He had not been late on a single bill in 4 years, not once, not by a day. That record wasn't luck. It was a structure he had built deliberately around her, with no margin for error and no room for risks that didn't have to be taken. Marcus Webb appeared at the far end of the corridor. "Carter. You're supposed to be on the east wing." Anthony nodded. Picked up the cart. Started walking east. What happened next was not impulsive. It was not spontaneous heroism. It was a man who had spent 11 years thinking while mopping, thinking while reading in empty break rooms at 2 in the morning, thinking while covering his daughter with a blanket before driving to a second job, arriving at the end of a very long thought. The sound reached him before he had taken 10 steps east. Briefcases snapping shut. One, then another, then several in close succession, the specific percussion of a decision being made, of people who have concluded that a room no longer holds anything worth staying for. He stopped walking. He thought about a box in the back of his closet. A scholarship letter he had never been able to throw away. The version of himself he had packed in alongside the textbooks, not destroyed, not abandoned, just deferred. He turned the word over. Deferred. Delayed, not cancelled. Held, not surrendered. He turned around. He walked back to the conference room door. He raised his hand and held it there for 3 full seconds, 3 seconds in which the entire weight of his life pressed against his knuckles, in which every reason not to knock competed with the one reason that had always been there, waiting, and knocked. The door opened to a junior executive who looked at him with the particular expression of someone encountering something that doesn't fit any existing category, not hostile, not welcoming, simply uncomprehending. A man in gray coveralls standing at the entrance to the most important negotiation of the decade. Webb was already moving down the hallway from the east end, his face arranged into something between disbelief and controlled fury. Anthony didn't look at him. He looked past the executive, directly at the CEO, a woman in a charcoal blazer who had the eyes of someone who had spent 3 hours watching something she built begin to come apart. "I heard the Arabic delegate's statement through the door," Anthony said. His voice was quiet and completely steady. It wasn't a refusal. It was a conditional opening. The third interpreter translated goodwill as hostility. The Mandarin framing in the opening terms is also wrong. It reads as a demand when the cultural register requires a partnership framing. If those 2 errors aren't corrected in the next few minutes, this negotiation doesn't recover. Webb arrived. "Carter, I told you." The CEO raised one hand. Webb stopped. She looked at Anthony. Not the half-second inventory that people perform when a service worker enters a space where they aren't expected, the longer look of someone recalibrating, someone whose mental model is shifting in real time. "Which languages?" "All 8 represented in that room." She held his gaze for a moment that contained, on her side, the full weight of what she stood to lose, and on his, the full weight of what he had already lost once and was choosing to risk again. 60 seconds, she said. "If you can't deliver, you walk out and we don't speak of this again." She stepped aside. Anthony walked in. Here is what no one tells you about genuine expertise: it doesn't announce itself with credentials. It arrives looking exactly like what the moment requires, and in this moment it arrived in gray coveralls and yellow rubber gloves, standing at the center of a U-shaped table while 47 of the most powerful negotiators on earth tried to decide what they were looking at. He turned to the Chinese delegation and spoke Mandarin. Not textbook Mandarin. Lived Mandarin, the Mandarin of someone who understood that the same word in a different register carries an entirely different message. He reframed the opening terms as an invitation between equals. The lead delegate, who had not shifted her expression in 4 hours, tilted her head slightly. Then she nodded. The room moved 1 degree. It was enough to start. Quick question: when Anthony walked into that room in coveralls and rubber gloves, do you think the delegates took him seriously the moment he spoke? Or did he have to earn every single second of their attention 1 language at a time? Drop your answer in the comments. Some of you already know exactly what it feels like to be the most qualified person in a room that doesn't know your name yet. He worked the table the way a skilled interpreter never had, not translating language, but translating the human beings behind it. Arabic came next. He didn't use modern standard Arabic, the formal register the previous interpreters had defaulted to, technically correct, but carrying none of the relational warmth that Gulf business culture requires before trust can exist. He used a warmer register, the Arabic of genuine partnership, and addressed the mistranslation directly. What had been rendered as a refusal had expressed a desire to understand the terms more precisely before committing. In Gulf business culture, that is not hesitation. It is a form of respect. The delegation leader uncrossed his arms. He responded, and Anthony translated for the room: "An apology is not necessary, but accuracy going forward is not optional." German required a different discipline: precision over warmth, structure over relationship. German contractual language is specific by design, because ambiguity is not a feature in German commercial culture, it is a failure of intention. Anthony rebuilt the disputed clause word by word in the exact register of German commercial law, where every term carries a defined legal weight and substitutions are not acceptable. The lead counsel's expression moved from closed to considering. Japanese demanded the most care, and Anthony slowed down for it deliberately. In Japanese business negotiation, language is only part of the communication, honorific structure, degree of formality, and the physical positioning of respect all carry equal weight. He used the correct honorific level for each delegate's rank. He bowed slightly before speaking. He placed the delegation's concerns at the center of his translation rather than the margins, because in Japanese professional culture, where you are placed in a sentence is as meaningful as what is said about you. The Tokyo team, which had been formally cold for 2 hours, exhaled. That exhale was not warmth. It was the precondition for re-engagement, a finer and more important distinction. Portuguese, French, Spanish, each carrying its own architecture of trust, its own unspoken rules about what commerce means between peoples with complicated shared histories. Anthony moved through them not as a performer demonstrating range but as a practitioner solving specific problems with specific tools. 60 seconds became 20 minutes. The deal didn't just survive, it clarified. When the last signature was placed, the Saudi delegation leader looked across the table and spoke in classical Arabic, the older register, the language people reach for when a moment requires their oldest words. It translated as, "You gave us back our own voices." Anthony nodded. He did not translate it for the room. Some acknowledgments are not meant to be passed along. They are meant to be received, and held, and carried. Webb had the report drafted before Anthony stepped back into the hallway. It was thorough. Unauthorized access to a restricted negotiation facility. Misrepresentation of professional credentials. Violation of facilities policy, Section 7, Paragraph 3. Every checkbox filled. Every violation catalogued with the meticulous care of a man who genuinely believes that procedure is civilization's skeleton, and who is not entirely wrong to believe it. He carried it into the CEO's office and placed it on her desk with the composed satisfaction of someone completing a task they considered necessary and correct. She read it. Both sides. Every line. Then she picked up the same pen that had just signed a multi-billion-dollar international agreement, looked at Webb, and tore the report in half. Then in half again. Placed the pieces in the recycling bin. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest thing in the room. Webb's face didn't change. But something behind it did, the barely visible shift of a man watching a structure he has maintained his entire career develop its first serious crack. That man, she said quietly, just saved something that 14 credentialed professionals couldn't. And you want me to file him under misconduct? Webb made his case, and it was not a foolish one. Rules exist because they hold things in place. Hierarchies exist because they allow large systems to function without constant renegotiation of every boundary. If you reward someone for bypassing every protocol, you signal that outcomes justify any method, and that is genuinely how institutional structures begin to fail. He was not being petty. He was being principled, in the particular way of people whose principles have never been tested against their blind spots. She kept looking at the recycling bin. Our system failed publicly in front of 8 countries, she said. 14 people with credentials, clearance, and authority couldn't do what this man did in 60 seconds. If the system can't recognize that kind of talent when it's been standing in our building for 4 years, then the system isn't working. It's just running. There is a difference between a system that works and a system that runs. A system that runs processes inputs and produces outputs and maintains its procedures. A system that works serves the actual purpose it was built to serve. Webb's system had been running flawlessly, sorting, documenting, maintaining its lines. It had missed Anthony Carter completely. Those are not contradictory facts. They are the same fact, seen from 2 different angles. Schedule a meeting for Monday, she said. Mr. Carter. HR, legal, and me. Webb stared at the bin. About what? About what we've been throwing away. Monday morning, Anthony came to the building through the service entrance out of habit. He caught himself at the door, stopped, and walked around to the front. Security had a visitor badge waiting. First time in 4 years his name had appeared in the system as anything other than maintenance staff. The guard handed it across without ceremony. Anthony clipped it to his coveralls, he hadn't owned anything else to wear to this meeting, and rode the elevator to the 31st floor. The offer was genuine and generous. Senior Linguistic Consultant. Global Partnerships Division. Salary, benefits, an office with a window. Anthony listened to all of it. Then he said he needed a day. That evening he cooked dinner and helped Jade with her French homework. She read a sentence aloud, her accent landing in the approximate region of correct. He adjusted it without thinking, the nasal vowel, the liaison she'd missed, the rhythm that makes French feel like French rather than English wearing French clothing. She looked up. Dad. How many languages do you actually speak? He looked at her for a long moment, at her mother's eyes, at the serious face that caught everything. 8, he said. Fluently. She stared at him. And you've been cleaning subway stations. He smiled. I've been keeping you fed. The next morning he returned with a handwritten list. Not demands, terms. A title that reflected his actual function. A seat at the principal table during negotiations, not the side chair where consultants are placed to signal that their role is advisory rather than essential. And one more item, a formal internal process for identifying overlooked talent across every level of the organization, not as a feel-good initiative, but as a structural correction to a known and documented system failure. The CEO read the list. This is exactly the kind of thinking we needed 5 years ago. She signed it. Then called her chief of operations. I want a review of every building we operate. Custodial, security, kitchen, data entry, everyone. Full skills assessment. We've been optimizing for credentials and ignoring capability. I want to know what that's cost us. What Anthony understood, and what that handwritten list made visible, is that genuine transformation is not a gesture. It is a redesign. A company that promotes one overlooked person and changes nothing structurally has not solved a problem. It has decorated it. The real question is never about the individual who finally got noticed. It is about the system that made them invisible in the first place, and whether anyone has the courage to rebuild that part. Years later, Jade Carter stood at a university podium in cap and gown, linguistics and international relations, full scholarship, and found her father in the third row. He was wearing a suit. It still fit. My father taught me languages, she said, but the most important thing he ever taught me had nothing to do with words. He taught me that the people the world refuses to listen to are usually the ones who have spent the longest time learning how to listen themselves. Anthony sat very still. He thought about a hallway at 4 a.m. A cracked door. A hand held in the air for 3 seconds. He thought about the box in the back of his closet, the textbooks, the scholarship letter, the version of himself he had packed away and never thrown out, because somewhere underneath 11 years of survival he had always known that deferred is not the same as gone. 14 interpreters heard words. Anthony Carter heard people. And somewhere right now, in a building near you, someone is doing the same, carrying something extraordinary through ordinary hours, waiting not for permission, but for a door left slightly open. The question was never whether they had something worth hearing. The question is whether you'll be paying attention when they speak. If Anthony's story hit different, smash that like button and subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper into the spaces where the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, doing the work, carrying the gift, waiting for one door to open. And it's already waiting for you.